The sun was barely up when the rusty screen door of Mr. Elijah Carter's shotgun house creaked open, the sound cutting through the quiet of his worn-down Memphis neighborhood. At 72, his hands shook as he clutched a coffee mug, the steam curling, into the humid morning air. He didn't know it yet, but the day would start with cruelty and end with a reckoning. Across town, 17-year-old Jamal Thompson tugged at the sleeves of his too-small hoodie, boarding the 6:15 a.m. bus to his summer job. He'd been saving every dollar for college, dreaming of a future bigger than the cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights he'd grown up with. Neither of them could have guessed how their lives, and the lives of everyone around them, were about to collide in a storm of injustice, courage, and secrets that refused to stay buried. It began with a traffic stop, or at least, that's what the officers called it. Mr. Carter's ancient pickup sputtered as he drove home from the grocery store, a bag of bread and canned beans sliding across the passenger seat. The patrol car's lights flashed blue and red in his rearview mirror, and his chest tightened. He'd been through this before. The officers, one with a smirk, the other avoiding eye contact, claimed his tags were expired. They asked him to step out, to check for contraband. But when they slid a wad of cash from his glove box, $800 painstakingly saved for his granddaughter's diabetes medication, into their own pockets, Elijah's protest died in his throat. "You know how this works, old man," the smirking cop muttered, leaning close enough for Elijah to smell stale coffee. "Run your mouth, and next time, it won't just be money we take." Meanwhile, Jamal shifted uncomfortably as the bus lurched forward. His eyes landed on a pregnant woman standing near the back, her blonde hair sticking to her forehead in the July heat. She gripped a pole with one hand, the other resting on her swollen belly. Without thinking, he stood. "Here," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. The woman, Linda, her name tag said, thanked him with a tired smile. But as she sat, her fingers brushed against his palm, pressing a folded note into his hand. "Read it, later," she whispered, her voice urgent. Before he could ask why, she'd slipped off at the next stop, disappearing into the crowd. Back in Elijah's living room, dust motes floated in the shafts of light cutting through drawn blinds. His calloused fingers dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice like gravel. "Dad?" Elijah's throat closed. Marcus hadn't spoken to him since enlisting, since the fight about wasting his life joining the army. But now, hearing his son's voice, Elijah's resolve cracked. "They took it all, Mark," he rasped. "The money for Lila." A beat of silence. Then, low and dangerous, "Who?" The note burned in Jamal's pocket, all day. During his lunch break, hidden in the stockroom of the hardware store where he mopped floors, he unfolded it. The handwriting slanted sharply. "They're watching you. The cops. Don't go home." His blood turned to ice. Crumpling the paper, he peered through the grimy window. Across the street, a patrol car idled. The same two officers from Elijah's. Stop leaned against the hood, staring right at him. Dusk painted the sky orange when Marcus Carter's boots hit Memphis soil. The Green Beret's duffel bag held more than gear. It carried a fury he'd honed in the mountains of Afghanistan. He knew the streets here, knew the games. What he didn't know was that 3 blocks away, Jamal was ducking through alleyways, the cops' footsteps echoing behind him, or that Linda, the pregnant woman, wasn't just a stranger, but someone with a badge of her own, racing against time to expose the rot festering in her precinct. As night fell, Elijah sat alone, the shadows in his house stretching long. Headlights sliced through the darkness outside. Car doors slammed. "Open up, Mr. Carter," a voice barked. It wasn't a request. His heart hammered as he rose, knees popping. Somewhere in the city, Marcus was closing in. Jamal was one wrong turn from disaster, and the truth about the stolen money, the note, the web of corruption binding them all hung by a thread. And in that moment, as fists pounded on Elijah's door, the knocking turned to thunder, 3 sharp raps that made Elijah's front door shudder in its frame. He reached for the knob, hands steadier than they'd been in years. when a roar of engines split the night. Through the warped window he saw headlights, 2 motorcycles tearing down the street, their riders' faces hidden behind black helmets. The cops at his door spun toward the noise, hands flying to their holsters. "The hell?" one muttered. Elijah held his breath as the bikes skidded to a stop, blocking the patrol car. The lead rider revved his engine once, a challenge in the growl of machinery, and the officers hesitated. For 10 heartbeats, no one moved. Then, with a curse, the cops retreated to their car, peeling away with tires screeching. The riders didn't follow, just sat there, engines idling until Elijah's porch light flickered out. Across town, Jamal pressed himself into the gap between a dumpster and a brick wall, the stench of rotting food thick in his nostrils. The cops' flashlights swept the alley. "Kid's gotta be here somewhere," one growled. Jamal's fingers found the note again, crumpled in his pocket. "They're watching you." He'd done nothing wrong, nothing but give up his seat. So why were they hunting him? The beam of light inched closer. His lungs burned. Then a crash, a stray cat knocking over a bottle further down the alley. The officers turned, cursing, and Jamal bolted. He didn't stop running until he reached the train tracks, his side cramping. Under a flickering street lamp, he smoothed Linda's note. There, in tiny letters under her warning, was an address. 1409 Marigold Street, the same block where his aunt used to live before the city condemned the buildings. Jamal knew that street, knew the hollow-eyed houses there. But he also knew the woman on the bus hadn't looked afraid. She'd looked guilty. Marcus Carter stood in the shadows of his father's porch, watching the motorcycles disappear. The second rider had been a woman. He'd seen the curve of her hips as she mounted the bike. Something about her posture had screamed military, even through the leather jacket. He waited until the rumble of engines faded before stepping inside. The sight of his father, smaller, frailer than he remembered, hit him like a sandbag to the chest. "They took Lila's medicine money," Elijah said, not looking up. A half-empty pill bottle sat on the table. Marcus picked it up. Insulin. His niece's laughter echoed in his memory. 6 years old, chasing fireflies in this very yard. Now her life depended on scraps stolen by men in uniform. "Names," Marcus said, his voice too calm. Elijah shook his head. "They'll come back, for you, for me. Let them." Marcus pulled a burner phone from his pocket, the screen lit with a map. Red dots clustered near the train yard. "Been tracking police stops. They're hitting the same streets, same folks, every week." His finger hovered over a dot 2 blocks from Jamal's hiding place. "This isn't random. It's a racket." The old man's eyes widened. "You think I don't know that? They took Mrs. Evers's Social Security check last month. Told her it was evidence." He spat the word like poison. "You think your army training makes you bulletproof? They'll bury you, Mark. Bury us both." Marcus almost smiled. "I'm not here to die. I'm here to remind them what fear tastes like." At dawn, Jamal stood outside 1409 Marigold. The house leaned like a drunkard, its porch sagging. Through a cracked window, he saw movement, a shadow. Then a face. Linda's face, pale and strained. She gestured frantically for him to come inside. The floorboards creaked as he stepped into the dim living room. Linda sat on a mattress, her pregnant belly protruding under a thin blanket. A police radio crackled on a milk crate beside her. "You shouldn't have come," she said, but relief colored her voice. "Why'd you give me that note?" Jamal demanded. She hesitated, then lifted her shirt. Not a baby bump, a wire. "I'm not pregnant," she said. The recording device gleamed. "And I'm not a civilian." Before Jamal could process this, the radio erupted. "All units, report to 322 Cypress Avenue." Linda froze. "That's Elijah Carter's house," she whispered. Marcus heard the sirens first. He'd been reviewing security footage from a bodega near his father's traffic stop. Grainy video of the officers pocketing cash from 3 different drivers. Now he watched through the blinds as 4 cruisers surrounded the block. "Dad, get in the basement now!" Elijah didn't argue. The lead cop's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Marcus Carter, step out with your hands up." Marcus slid his phone into the vent, still recording. "Let them come. Let the world see." As he opened the door, a different engine roared, a motorcycle weaving through the cop cars. The female rider's helmet visor flipped up. Linda. "He's with me," she shouted, waving a badge. "Internal Affairs, stand down." Confusion rippled through the officers. Marcus seized the moment, lunging off the porch. Linda revved the bike and he swung on behind her. They shot through the gap between 2 cruisers, officers diving out of the way. 2 blocks over, Jamal watched the chase from Linda's hideout. The TV news played silently. A mugshot of Marcus labeled armed and dangerous, but the Chiron below made his blood freeze. Police seek second suspect, Jamal Thompson, 17. Linda's radio crackled. Again, suspect spotted near train yard, a pause. Use of force authorized. Jamal backed away. The cops had his name, his face, and somewhere in this rotting house, Linda had hidden the evidence to clear them both. He just had to find it. Before the sirens got closer, before Marcus took the fall, before Lila ran out of medicine. Outside, a floorboard creaked. Not the wind, not the house settling, someone was inside.